The crowd gathered under the harsh sun, their boots grinding dust into the wooden planks of the auction block. Evelyn stood rigid, her wrists clenched together though no rope bound them. The auctioneer barked words as though selling cattle, his voice sharp, his tone careless. Men called out from the crowd, their laughter crude, their offers lower than what they would pay for a horse. She kept her eyes on the horizon, refusing to give them the satisfaction of her shame. Her late husband's family had cast her out, their verdict swift and merciless, barren, unfit, worthless. Now she was being sold, traded like stock, because no one wanted to feed a woman who could not produce heirs. Then a silence fell. A man stepped forward through the dust, a baby in the crook of his arm. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of his face, though the scar along his jaw caught the light. The child stirred, gave a soft cry, and he tightened his hold. Without a word, he placed a sum higher than any man before him. No bargaining, no hesitation. The auctioneer stammered, surprised, then slammed his gavel. The deal was done. The whispers that rippled through the crowd were louder than the bid itself. Why would a man burdened with an infant buy a barren widow? Evelyn dared to lift her gaze toward him, and for the first time that day, her heart thudded with something other than dread. His eyes were weary but steady, the eyes of someone who had carried too much loss to flinch at hers. The ride to his ranch stretched long, the land wide and unforgiving, sagebrush rolling across golden hills. The silence between them pressed heavy. She watched him from the corner of her eye, the way he adjusted the child with practiced ease, the way he scanned the horizon with the alertness of a man who expected trouble. He gave no explanation, no comfort, only his name, Caleb, offered in a low voice that brooked no further talk. When they arrived, the ranch unfolded before her, rough-hewn fences circling restless horses, the house standing lonely against the sky. It was no grand homestead, yet it breathed with quiet resilience. Caleb guided her inside, set the baby girl into a wooden cradle, and began instructing her in the daily routines. His words were clipped, practical, without cruelty but also without warmth. She tried to follow, though her hand shook when the baby cried. Bottles slipped, blankets tangled, and she flushed with helplessness, her chest aching with the sting of failure. At night, when the baby's wails echoed through the house, she crept from her bed and rocked her under the stars, humming the half-forgotten lullabies her mother once sang. Slowly, the infant quieted, her tiny fingers curling around Evelyn's own. Caleb watched from the doorway, silent, unreadable, his face a mixture of exhaustion and something softer he did not let reach his voice. Still, doubt gnawed at Evelyn. In the barn she remembered her husband's last fevered breath, remembered how his kin had stared at her as if she had caused his death by failing to give him children. Their words, sharp as spurs, carved into her memory, useless, cursed, unwanted. She gripped the wooden beams until splinters bit her palms, fighting the tears she had sworn never again to let anyone see. Caleb carried his own shadows. She learned them in fragments, when his gaze lingered on the folded shawl tucked in a trunk, when the baby's cries brought a flicker of grief before he forced it down. He had been a soldier once, then a husband, then suddenly neither. His wife had died giving life, leaving him with a ranch too large for one man and a child too small for a calloused hand. He had not bought Evelyn for her body, nor for companionship. He had bought her because his daughter needed someone to hold her when he could not. The days blended into a rhythm, harsh yet steady. She fed the animals, scrubbed the floors, learned to ride out with Caleb when fences sagged. Her muscles ached, her skin bronzed, her skirt stained. Still, she pressed on, each small success earning a nod from him, a glance that carried more weight than words. In the evenings, when the baby cooed in her arms, Evelyn began to feel something stirring where emptiness had been. A sense of place, fragile but real. It was one night, when the moon cast silver over the fields, that the ranch was tested. The sound of horses broke the stillness, too many, moving too fast. Caleb snatched his rifle, muttered a curse, and shoved Evelyn toward the house. Shots cracked in the dark, dirt spraying as hooves thundered near. Evelyn clutched the baby to her chest, her breath sharp and ragged. The cries of men, the clash of metal, the sharp sting of gunpowder filled the air. She pressed Lila beneath the table, whispering promises she had no right to make. Then instinct surged. Her hand found the rifle propped by the door. She had never fired one before, but she raised it, braced her body, and pulled the trigger. The shot burst into the night, wild but loud enough to send one of the raiders scrambling. Caleb fought with practiced skill, driving them back, but he saw her standing there, smoke curling from the rifle barrel, fear etched in her eyes yet steady in her stance. For the first time, his gaze carried respect, a flicker of something like pride. The raiders retreated into the darkness, their curses fading with the thunder of their retreating horses. In the aftermath, silence settled heavy over the ranch. Caleb leaned against the porch post, chest heaving, rifle still in hand. Evelyn stood beside him, the baby nestled close, the echo of the gunshot still ringing in her ears. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he broke the quiet with words rough but honest. He had not bought her to save her, he had bought her because his daughter needed a mother. Evelyn swallowed, her throat tight, and whispered back that perhaps she needed a family just as much. Unseen, beyond the fence line, one of the rustlers crawled through the dust, clutching a wound and swearing vengeance. The night closed around them, but Evelyn felt something shift within herself. She was no longer only the woman who had been sold. She was someone who had chosen to stand her ground, and that choice would change everything. Dawn came pale and bruised, the horizon streaked with the smoke of the burned lantern and the faint tracks of fleeing horses. Evelyn stepped into the yard, her skirt torn, her hair undone, the baby pressed tight against her chest. Caleb was already outside, blood darkening the sleeve of his shirt, his jaw clenched as he examined the splintered fence. He looked at her only briefly, as though words might shatter the fragile quiet between them. The night had left its mark, her hands still trembled from the rifle, his stance was slower, heavier. Yet beneath the exhaustion, something unspoken tethered them now. They had faced the dark together, and neither had turned away. The days that followed carried an edge of unease. Caleb worked despite his wound, refusing her insistence that he rest. She moved through the ranch with new purpose, each task sharpened by the memory of gunfire. The baby became her anchor. Every time Lila's laugh bubbled into the air, Evelyn felt the weight of her old shame loosen, thread by thread. Still, shadows lingered. She often caught Caleb staring at the far hills, his rifle always within reach. The rustlers were not gone. They had merely withdrawn to wait for another chance. It was in the small moments that change began to stir. One afternoon, she tried her hand at milking the goat, the animal stubborn and wild-eyed. The pail tipped, milk spilled, and the goat kicked her skirt so hard she nearly toppled into the dirt. She swore under her breath, cheeks flushed, then froze when Caleb chuckled, a low, startled sound as though he had forgotten how. The laugh softened the air between them, and for the first time she glimpsed the man he might have been before grief carved him hollow. That night, as the baby drifted to sleep, he lingered at the doorway longer than usual, his expression unreadable but less guarded. One evening, thunder rolled across the plains, and the sky split with sudden rain. Evelyn rocked the baby in the flicker of lamplight, her voice low and steady. Caleb entered quietly, set his rifle aside, and stood listening. His shoulders sagged as though the storm outside mirrored one within. Finally, he spoke, his voice raw, stripped of its usual restraint. He confessed his fear of losing everything, the ranch, the child, himself. He admitted he had thought a woman like Evelyn might steady the world he no longer trusted to hold. She swallowed hard, her heart twisting. In return, she offered her own wound, the cruel names, the exile, the emptiness that had shadowed her since she was cast aside. She told him that when Lila reached for her, she no longer felt barren, she felt alive. The storm raged, lightning searing the sky, but inside the house the silence turned tender. Neither spoke of love, but something passed between them deeper than any promise. It was not yet romance but recognition, two broken souls finding pieces of themselves in each other. The reprieve did not last. The rustlers returned with vengeance in their eyes and more men than before. The night of the attack was violent and swift. Hooves thundered closer, shouts rose like wolves circling prey, and gunfire split the darkness. Caleb met them head-on, rifle in hand, but he was outnumbered. Evelyn seized the child, pushed her beneath the floorboards, and braced the door. The walls shook with the force of the raiders crashing through the yard. Caleb fought with the skill of a soldier, yet a cry of pain tore through the night as a bullet struck his shoulder. Evelyn's breath caught, fear clawing at her throat, but desperation gave her strength. She gripped the rifle as though it had grown to be part of her. Her shots rang out, not always true but fierce enough to hold the men at bay. A raider burst through the window, his eyes gleaming with cruelty. With no time to aim, she seized a lantern and hurled it into his face. Flames leapt, glass shattered, the man's scream tore through the storm. The room filled with smoke, heat, and terror, yet she did not falter. She dragged Caleb inside, pressed his wound, and kept firing through the haze. The leader came last, striding through the wreckage with his revolver raised, his grin a cruel promise. Caleb struggled to lift his weapon, but his strength faltered. Evelyn stepped forward, rifle leveled, though her hand shook. The man's taunt sliced the air, barren, worthless, no better than the dirt beneath her feet. The words cut deep, yet instead of breaking her, they ignited her resolve. She pulled the trigger. The shot cracked, sharp and final. The leader fell, the echo of his body hitting the ground louder than his threats. When dawn rose again, the ranch bore scars. Smoke curled from the collapsed barn, fences lay broken, and the yard was littered with the signs of battle. Caleb sat on the porch, pale but alive, his arm bound where her trembling hands had wrapped it in cloth. Evelyn stood near, the baby in her arms, her own body bruised but unyielding. The silence between them was no longer empty but full of gratitude, of respect, of something still unspoken yet undeniable. He turned to her, his voice rough, not from command but from honesty. He told her she had not only protected his land but had saved what mattered most, his daughter, his hope, his family. Her breath caught, tears stinging her eyes, not from weakness but from a release she had never thought possible. She realized then that family was not made by blood but by the bonds one chose to keep. She was no longer the widow who had been sold for her emptiness. She was a woman who had fought for belonging and earned it with fire and courage. Caleb reached out, his hand hesitant yet steady, and took hers. "Stay," he said. Not because he had bought her, not because he needed her, but because she belonged. The baby stirred between them, a small sound that broke into a laugh, and for the first time Evelyn let herself smile without fear. The sun spread gold across the plains, touching the charred edges of the ranch as though promising renewal. Evelyn lifted her face to the warmth, her fingers twined with Caleb's, the child nestled against her chest. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, she wanted to walk it. The world had called her barren, cast her aside, but here, on this scarred and stubborn land, she had found life. The story might have ended there, yet the horizon still stretched wide, untamed, and full of trials waiting. Their peace was fragile, their future uncertain, but Evelyn no longer feared what lay ahead. She had stood in the fire and chosen to remain. And that choice would carry her further than she ever dreamed.